Hey everybody, glad that you made it. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is one of my favorite weekends that we have at Harbor Point Church. It's what we call Outreach Weekend. My name's Jeff. I'm one of the pastors here, and I'm just so grateful that you made it because this is a great opportunity for us to articulate a lot of what is at the heartbeat of what makes us us. Now, as we say all the time, if you've ever been with us before, is that we're not a place where we've got all the answers. We don't have it all figured out. This isn't a place for people who are kind of already have arrived. It's really a place for people in progress. And so, one of the things we get to talk about in this particular weekend is how is it that we respond as a church community who is attempting to do its best to aim our lives at Jesus. How is it that we respond to what Jesus is calling the church to do, which is to love the people that are in the margins, those people who are under-resourced, those kinds of folks. And this is what Outreach Weekend is all about. So if you're new with us, it's going to be incredible. The weekend we've got planned for you is the best. Hopefully, as you're thinking about some of these things, your own kind of heart and mind gets kind of oriented around this very idea of kind of caring for the marginalized and the lonely and the lost. So anyway, lot to cover today. Let's get right to it as we kind of build up into this whole kind of idea. So let's start here. Think back, and this might not be that long ago for you, but think back in your life. Why were the most popular people in school, whatever that looks like? Why were the most popular? Now, for a 7-year-old, what makes someone the most popular is actually different. There's a lot of similarities, but there's actually something different from what makes someone who's 17 years, like a 17-year-old, the way they envision popularity is different. For a 7-year-old, the way that one scientist has kind of talked about this, a guy named Mitch Prinstein, and it's just so ironic. Mitch Prinstein is, of course, a professor at the University of North Carolina, not Princeton like you thought. Anyways, but here's what he says. He goes, look, there's basically two kinds of popularity. For a little kid, they'll often identify something that more aligns with something called likability, whereas someone who's 17, like a high school student, will obviously identify with something called status. So when he's describing the idea of popularity for a 7-year-old, he'll describe it like this. This is someone who's kind and collaborative and inclusive. This is the kind of thing that makes someone popular. When you talk about status with someone who's junior high and up, what they're actually talking about is something different. Visibility, someone who's influential, someone who's dominant. And a 7-year-old is aware of status, about who's the most dominant person on the playground or whatever else. But a 17-year-old is neurochemically sort of rewiring their brain to be compelled to need status. In fact, another way to say it is that a 17-year-old organizes their identity around the idea of status, which a 7-year-old would not necessarily do. So you get there's two different kinds of the ways of thinking about sort of popularity, but particularly when we start talking about the idea of status, this is something we're a lot more familiar with. In fact, it starts maybe at puberty, but it goes all the way in sort of on into our adult life of longing for and seeking a kind of visibility, influence, and dominance. Now, popularity is about solving something. It's actually about solving a particular thing. And the question that popularity is addressing is, how do I know I matter? How do I know I matter? That's really the question that popularity is addressing. Now, last week, we started a series called Uncommon Sense. And often in Jesus' teaching and ministry, you see over and over again, the Bible will often say that the disciples will see Jesus do something or say something or react in a particular way. And it says over and over again that they did not understand. Like they saw him do a thing, and then they were like, we don't even know what he's doing, because Jesus is shattering expectations. Over and over again, he's shattering expectations. Like, even though they're so much different than us, the disciples are actually kind of believe similarly that we do, which is like, listen, we're entitled to understanding everything. And so much of what Jesus does, they're like, we do not understand what he's doing. Now, the Bible, it turns out, doesn't actually promise that we'll understand everything either. I mean, we talked about this last week, and we're kind of sort of using it to kind of anchor ourselves as we talk throughout this series. But Isaiah 55, verse 8 and 9 says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, and neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." Then it goes on, "As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Now, all that's simply to say is that there's one area, there's lots of areas that don't make sense, but one area we're going to talk about today that doesn't make sense to people in and around the time of Jesus and his ministry is that the people who don't matter much, in other words, as a society, people are looking at certain groups of people and saying, these people are not that consequential. The people who didn't matter much seemed to matter most to Jesus. The people who didn't matter much mattered most to Jesus. Throughout his ministry, over and over again, the people who are in the margins, those people who didn't matter much mattered most to Jesus. Now, why that matters is that by associating with these people who didn't matter much to most people, by associating with those people, it quite literally lowered Jesus's status, and it lowered the status of the people who were connected to him, his disciples, because the disciples are always, it seems, concerned, at least as the beginning of their ministry sort of work with Jesus, they always seem to be concerned with their own status. And by being connected to this person, Jesus, they're lowering their own status by the fact that he keeps on going to find people who seem not to matter to anybody else. Now, our current kind of world is the most status obsessed of any culture ever. I mean, again, back to our good buddy Mitch Prinstein, he says, with regards to this sort of status kind of quest, he says there are problems for individuals who pursue status and problems for us as a society that has continued to invest in this type of popularity. Those who care most about their social standing grow up to have difficulties with their interpersonal relationships years later. So you might be the most popular person as a high school student, but by the time you get to, if that's something you really value about it, it's going to compromise your relationships. He continues, they remain fixated on their status and even others' popularity rather than on attributes that may lead to a fulfilling human connection. Other research suggests that those who wish the most for status are the most likely to later report anxiety, depression, and problems with substance abuse. In other words, what he's saying, which the disciples didn't get, and which, again, according to Mitch Prinstein here, our whole society is missing, is that more status is actually a kind of a pathway to more insecurity. More status equals more insecurity. I mean, we're constantly competing for attention and visibility and influence. And what we tend to believe, if anybody is getting it, and they're in my presence, they're literally taking something from me. They're taking my own ability to matter from me. In that sense, we've kind of become slaves to attention seeking as a society. And for some of us, you might be like, look, well, I don't really care about popularity and status. It's never really been my thing. I don't care about that. It's not a big deal. But we do all ask the same question. How do I know that I matter? I mean, it may not be popularity in that sense, but there's another way we think about it. One writer, a guy named Derek Thompson, he says in an article, which I think is a fascinating article, it's called Workism is Making Americans Miserable. I'll explain that in a second. He says this: some people worship beauty, some worship political identities, others worship their children, but everybody worships something. But workism, his own thing he's talking about here, is among the most potent of all the new religions competing for congregants. What is workism? It's the belief that work is not only necessary to economic production, but also the centerpiece of one's identity and life's purpose. What's more, in a recent Pew Research report, 95% of teens said that having a job or career they enjoy would be extremely or very important to them as an adult, which doesn't sound like a big deal, except for this. This ranked higher than any other priority, including helping other people who are in need at 81% or getting married at 47%. In other words, finding meaning at work beats family and kindness as the top ambition of today's young people. Everybody's looking for a way to identify how they know that they matter. It may be status in terms of like the way most of us think about status, like in terms of social media and all the other kind of stuff, but it's also this. The bottom line is this, however you might think about it, however we're trying to figure out how we know we matter, the bottom line is this: always be first and be the most. Never be last or least. Get as much attention as possible and give very little to anybody else. Always be first and the most. Never be last, never be least, and always get a lot of attention and give very little of it wherever possible. Now, as we think about that, all of it kind of makes sense, and I've kind of gone through it relatively quickly, but the idea, which most of us are not surprised by, is that it seems like the solutions that we have for our longing to wonder if we matter, the solutions might actually be the problem. Like, all of the things we're giving ourselves to resolve to figure out whether or not we matter, all of those things seem to actually be robbing us of actually mattering. In other words, maybe the solution, or what if the solution, is something to all of that stuff that we're feeling about that kind of deep insecurity is something that doesn't make sense, but somehow makes perfect sense. What if the solution that we're looking for, not the one that we've already tried, is something that doesn't make sense? And maybe it's something, it doesn't make sense, but somehow it makes perfect sense. Here's Mark chapter 9, beginning in verse 30. They left that place and passed through Galilee, and Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were. Jesus had just come from a moment where, if you're with us last week, we kind of highlighted Jesus healing a particular person. And by the way, we're going to still give you an opportunity to come forward and receive prayer for healing. If that's something you still want at the end of our service, we did this last week as well. It was amazing. And I know for a lot of people, they just had to go or whatever else. We're going to make that available as well today. But what happened is there was there's a big crowd that saw it. And Jesus apparently now, he's leaving that place and he didn't want anybody to know where they were going. And there's the reason for this. Because he was going to teach his disciples, which means he's pulling them aside. This wasn't a crowd thing. We already did the crowd thing. This isn't a public proclamation. He's just going to grab his disciples and he's going to give to them a particular teaching that will be difficult, not for the whole crowd. Verse 31. He said to them, meaning his disciples, the Son of Man, which is a royal title Jesus used for himself, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They'll kill him, and after 3 days, he will rise. So this is the teaching he's giving his disciples, which sounds kind of bizarre. But they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask about it. Now, the disciples don't have a category at all for someone who's a king who's going to be killed, but who's also going to rise again. We tend to think about, in terms of looking back at this from our own lens of Easter, which you may or may not, fully believe, but Easter being kind of the central moment of sort of Christian faith, going backwards into we kind of have an idea. We think everybody's like, they're all on board with the idea of someone being killed and rising again. They don't have any idea for this. They have no category for this. Here's Jesus saying, I'm the king God has appointed to rule over the whole earth, in effect. I'm going to be killed and then I'm going to rise again. And there's one other factor. For these disciples, a disciple at this particular time isn't just, if you're with us a couple weeks ago, we talked about this, but a disciple isn't a person just wanting to know what their teacher knows. They're wanting to become as the teacher is. So now what they have is this picture of Jesus who's going to be killed and then rise again, and they have no idea how to answer this question, and they didn't understand, and we're afraid to ask them about it. Maybe because the implications meant they would have to do some kind of similar thing of being killed or something, which turns out that's actually not that far off, but they were kind of freaked out by it. Verse 33, they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, what were you guys arguing about on the road? So there, evidently he could overhear them talking a little bit. What were you guys arguing about? But they were quiet. You know that situation where you have, where you maybe been there before, where your parents or a teacher or something is like, what are you guys fighting about? And you know it's stupid, or you know you're busted, so you don't say anything because you know it's stupid, or because you know you're embarrassed, or whatever else. And Jesus just talked about what he's talked about. These guys you're arguing, Jesus hears them arguing. He's like, what are you guys talking about? But they didn't, nothing. Jesus like, what, cat got your tongue? What are you talking about? They kept quiet because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Of the 12 of these disciples, they're all arguing who's the greatest person in here. And now they're a little quiet, like, we weren't talking about anything, Jesus. What were you saying again about rising? That's really cool. Can you tell us more about that? I mean, who knows? Verse 35, Jesus sits down. Jesus called the 12. So now sitting down, this is the posture of a teacher. And he says, anyone who wants to be first, which means he's about to tell them, you want to be great? There's a pathway to greatness. There's a pathway to being the first and the foremost. Here's the path. You must be the very last and the servant of all. Well, that's a little different than maybe they were thinking about it. It's a little different than the way the world defines it. If you want to be first, there's a pathway to being first. You want to be great? Here's what it is. Be not just the last, be the very last. Not just the last. You're going to be last of the last. That's how you know. And you're going to be the servant of all people. Now, it's a little different, like I said, than the world defines it. In the first century, this is how this looked. According to one commentary, it says this. In the Jewish culture, this period first meant rulers and aristocrats and ruling priests and other persons of authority and influence. Thus, to be last and servant was to be someone with no rank, no authority, no privilege. That is to say, zero status. A status that humans ordinarily did not covet. So up to this point, in the story of kind of Jesus' ministry, up to this point, at least in the Gospel of Mark, it's all been kind of like a lot of triumph. Jesus is conquering over stuff. He's doing these miracles. All of these people who are kind of shouting him down, Jesus is he's resisting them. It's amazing. So look, it even says this, the very first words Jesus has in the Gospel of Mark are these words right here. Check this out, Mark chapter 1. Jesus went into Galilee proclaiming the good news of God, saying this, the time has come, the kingdom of God has come near. It's all going to be kingdom and rulers. When he recruits his disciples a couple chapters later, it looks like this in Mark 3. He appointed the 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and they might have authority to drive out demons. It's all winning. Everything is just crushing everything else. It's amazing. Giving authority, preaching, dealing with even demonic, spiritual, all of this stuff is for them. But he says that's not what makes you great. All of that stuff, none of that is what makes you first or foremost in this kingdom of God stuff. What makes you great? It's humility, it's service. In the kingdom of God, if you want to elevate your status, you have to let go of all claims to status. He says, be the very last, be the servant of all. Be the very last. You want to be first, be the very last, be the servant of all. Now, all of us, if we're honest, put an asterisk next to the word all, because we're like, all, I mean, really all. We all have an asterisk around all people because we all need a kind of reasonable justification to exclude some people from the all category, because all is a pretty big umbrella. Very last is servant of all. We all need a reasonable justification for excluding, like, for instance, your annoying neighbor who tells you you're supposed to cut the cardboard before you put it in the thing. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to, thank you. I'll take my chances that they won't care. You know, like whatever, that the waste management person won't care about that. Or the stranger that's just a little scary. Or the guy when you're pulling into a parking lot who takes your parking spot immediately before, like you can see your signal's on and they do this and they get out of their car and keep on moving. And it's like, what am I going to do? Fight this person? I guess I just have to eat it. That person. Maybe it's an aloof cashier where you're like, this person doesn't even know me. They don't even acknowledge me. Maybe it's a person having an unnecessarily loud conversation on a speakerphone, like they just have a speakerphone going and they're letting everybody just kind of be a part of it. Maybe it's someone, ooh, this is a big one. Maybe there's some of those people that you've seen who are what my kids refer to as e-bike dancers. These are people who decide that it's their turn to just, they think they're so impressive, but they're holding up traffic, doing wheelies and kicking their legs and acting. It's like, you're a bike dancer. Way to go, bike dancer. Those people. Maybe it's your political opponent. Maybe it's an immigrant. Maybe it's a poor person or an unthankful person or a homeless person or a lazy person. But all of us, every single one of us, unless we're not being honest with ourselves, all of us have this. We all have someone who we go, there's a person I could probably exclude because they don't fit all the way I like all. All of us do. I was thinking as I was just kind of wrestling with some of this stuff for myself, I was thinking about how I can kind of identify these kind of people for me. It's the people I refuse to make eye contact with. You know, it's the person that I'm seeing, whatever that might be, someone who I'm like, I just don't even want to acknowledge this person is even there. Like I've tried to work on this a little bit too, but it's like, how is it that I might just try to acknowledge, like, if I can act like I don't see them and they don't see me, then there's something about them that's like, maybe I can get away with maybe that's just part of the justification for it. I don't want to go step in to kind of talk to a person who may need something, who may be hurting, or who may be annoying, or who may be difficult for me, or someone I actually don't really like, whatever all that is. I don't see, I'm just moving through. You don't see me, I don't see you. But Jesus doesn't give his disciples an asterisk. He says, be the very last. Be the servant of all. There's a surprising subtext to this too as well, which sometimes people miss, is that Jesus isn't saying you could just be a doormat for evil or bad things or bad people. Jesus isn't afraid to confront people. He's okay with disappointing people. It's just that Jesus never sees himself above anybody else. Verse 36. Then Jesus took a little child whom he placed among them, which, let me pause here for a second. That means at some point when Jesus gathered the disciples for teaching, he also put a little kid in there, because it says he took whom he placed among them. So there's a child that was placed among them, and they're all like, who's this? Whose kid is this? We're all sitting next to some kid. The disciples are having a teaching away from the crowd, and it's all of a sudden there's a kid there. And then Jesus, verse 37, taking the child, picks him up and said to them, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me doesn't just welcome me, but that welcomes the one who sent me. In other words, there's a whole lot going on here. This kid is an object lesson, which kind of lost on us. First of all, we have to think about this. So he's intending to kind of illustrate something by having this kid. So they're sitting there. Then Jesus puts a kid in the midst of them. And then he says, he says, like, he says, whoever welcomes someone like this, a child like this welcomes me. Little children in my name welcomes me. Now, for the 21st century kind of person, we have kind of this sweet moment here. And I think it's important to kind of acknowledge that kids in the first century are not like innocent, cherished, and protected sort of people the way we think about them. Here's kind of a harsh analysis from the social science commentary on the New Testament. Check this out. It says this. While a minor, a child was on par with a slave. So just a young person is on par with a slave. And only after reaching maturity was he or she a free person who could inherit the family estate. The orphan was the stereotype of the weakest and most vulnerable members of society. So if you had to find someone who's the most exposed, it's a child who doesn't have a claim to a family. The term child or children could also be used as a serious insult, which means When Jesus is picking up a kid, he's saying this is a person who has no status and can give no status. And Jesus is making even a further connection that if you welcome a kid in my name, you're welcoming me, and you're actually more so you're welcoming my Father. Because God has a unique kind of closeness to people without status. And Jesus is like, if you want to be great, welcome people who cannot elevate your status. Jesus is saying we're not above serving anyone. If you want to be great, be the very last, be the servant of all. Now, what do we do with this? A couple things before we I'll pass this on in a second, but in the ancient Near East, there's one other thing you have to know about kids in the ancient Near East. The only claim to status that they have is because of their family, and more specifically, because of their father. So to say it this way, the greater that the family name or the greater that the father's name or reputation is, the greater the status. So to say it another way is the lesser the father's name or the family's name was, the lesser the status. So if you're just the son or daughter of a peasant farm worker, you're going to have a lower status and you have less to offer because there's no one to claim you. But if you are the son or daughter, say, of like Julius Caesar or Augustus Caesar, whatever Caesar there is in power at the time, the emperor, your own sort of status is elevated, and because it's connected to the father, your own family and father. Now, repeatedly in the Bible, the Bible will say this: through faith, people are adopted sons and daughters of God, which means their status could not get any higher by the fact of their attachment to the family to which they belong. Which means if we go back to that question, how do I know that I matter? Then it has nothing to do with status or attention or visibility in the way that our world talks about it. It's like this: how do I know that I matter? I'm responded to. I'm delighted in. I'm known. How do I know that I matter? I'm trusted, I'm chosen, and I'm remembered. All of these things are what are given to deeply and dearly loved sons and daughters by their own family. That's how they know that they matter. That's how you and I know that I matter. And it's all that any of us are really in need of in our lives. It's what we're looking for, but we seek it in so many other ways. And this is what Jesus is offering to us. And there's one other thing. He says, you have already received this kind of stuff where you're responded to, delighted in, known, trusted, chosen, and remembered. All of that stuff, not only have you received it, but it's also something that can be given. The way to welcome the person who's in the margins is to respond to them, to delight in them, to know them, to trust them, to choose them, and to remember them. Just for a moment, as you get a chance to kind of take in this list, which of these things is the thing that's the most kind of emotionally kind of pinging for you? That's like, wait a second, I know either this has been a huge gap in my life, I've never been responded to, I've been overlooked, forgotten, or I may have been tolerated but not delighted in, or I'm around people but they don't really know me, or I never am the person who gets chosen, or I feel like I'm constantly forgotten. Which of the thing that just gets a hold of your heart? Because maybe God's trying to kind of get a hold of you just for a moment to get your attention, to say, you really do matter. You're a beloved son or you're a beloved daughter of the King. And then Jesus says, you know you get it, in effect, because you actually can give this to other people. They can be known and responded to and trusted and chosen and remembered. Now, I'm going to invite Rob Fernandez to kind of give you kind of a sense of how we do this here at Harbor Point Church.
Maguire mentioned something really important. What does it mean to matter? What does that look like for us? What happens when we realize that we actually have this value that God has given us, that we do matter? Well, we know it changes us. And I have this incredible story that I want to share with you. Just a few months ago, it was our Christmas festival where we invite hundreds of families to our church for this huge party. And then families that are selected by our local school partnerships, they get to shop for gifts for their kids. Now, while most parents, they don't take their kids in to shop because they want it to be a surprise and there's wrapping and all of that happens inside of the worship center, there was one boy that went in with his mom and he's in there and they're shopping and he got to pick his gifts. But he goes back at the end after all the gifts have been selected and every child gets 2 gifts. Well, he has his two gifts and he takes them to get them wrapped. And our volunteers sitting there wrapping, and they're like, okay, let's get a tag, a name tag on this gift. What's your name? And he gives the name and they write it on the first gift. It might have been something like Hot Wheels. And then they're wrapping the next one. And while the volunteer was about to put the name tag in right, he says, wait, don't put my name. I want you to put this other name. It's the name of my cousin. And she said, okay, but you get two gifts. He said, yeah, I know. I'm going to receive this first one, but I want to give this second one. This is a boy no older than 10 years old. I want to give this other one. That could have been mine. I want to make sure that my cousin gets it. And in that moment, I'm realized like, wow, that is a story worth telling. Because here is a young boy who knew he mattered. In that moment, he has his gift. He's like, I matter. And I have the opportunity to let somebody else know that they matter. That's what outreach gets to be about. Extending God's love, letting people know that they're valued, that they're known, and that they're loved. So my name's Rob Fernandez. I have the great privilege of being your outreach pastor here at Harbor Point. I get to serve alongside you, and you, church, are having an incredible impact. Something that we say here often about who we are, especially through outreach, is that we are in the community for the community. And the way that we do that is that we're going to be with people, not just this transactional kind of one-way direction of charity, but instead, no, we're going to live life with people. We're going to know what they're experiencing, and we're going to care for them in that. And in those moments when we're with our community, we're starting to experience some real unity, and it is beautiful, and it's what God desires for us. Now, with Outreach Weekend, there's an invitation for everybody listening. The invitation is to pray, to serve, and to give. That these are kind of the three pillars in which we stand on, this holistic approach of how we're going to extend God's love, show the love of Jesus to our neighborhoods and beyond. Now, there's a reason why we do all three, and they're really important. First, let's talk about prayer. You see, when we pray on behalf of our community, something happens inside of us. I've heard this before, that prayer can move mountains, and I fully believe that. But just as powerful is that prayer can move us. That when we begin to pray for other people, God does something in us. We begin to be more sensitive. We begin to be more loving. We begin to be more aware of the people around us and their inherent value. And it is amazing. But here's what I know to be true, and the invitation to pray, very specifically, for families that are experiencing food insecurity. Sometimes it's hard to believe that we live in a place that anybody's having trouble finding a meal for their family, but I can tell you it's true. I've talked to families that genuinely, parents that are like, I don't know where the next meal will come from. Kids that are going to bed hungry. And so we pray. But you might be asking, well, is that all we do? Is the only thing we do pray? I'm like, no, there's action. And I love that a few months ago, we started what is called a pop-up food pantry, where families at a local elementary school, where we set up this incredible kind of area that parents can shop and go through and pick what they want. But there's fresh produce and milk and eggs and protein and really, really great stuff for these families to be able to take homes that they, again, maybe they were praying, like, how am I going to feed my family? This could be an answer to prayer. And so we've been able to help so many families. But while parents are shopping inside, outside, kids are in our mobile library bus. We do both at the same time. So while mom and dad are shopping, kids are having fun on this incredible mobile library. And you would think, like, kids are excited about a library. Yeah, they are. They line up to get onto the bus and be able to pick a book and read it outside and draw. It is so much fun because the pantry is serving so many people. This pantry that we do once a month right now, we've already, just right here in our own community, have been able to have that benefit over 1,000 people. 1,000 people that call our home as well. They've benefited from this pantry. So we're going to pray. We're going to pray for those families experiencing. You might be like, well, how do I do that? There's an online guided prayer for you. And it might take 8 to 10 minutes to do, but I really want to encourage you to sit down, and it'll walk you through what it looks like to pray for our neighbor that is experiencing food insecurity. And you can access it online or through our app as well. But when we pray, something happens. When we align our heart with God's heart, something happens. Again, it transforms us, and we are called to action. We feel like this pull to go do something about those that are experiencing this kind of food insecurity or hardship. And so we serve. Now, very uniquely, I want to invite you to save the date for an upcoming event that we call Impact Day. Impact Day will be a day where our whole church, we need everybody because we have a big goal in mind. We are going to pack over 100,000 meals together, as well as as much of a semi-truck of disaster relief supplies as we possibly can, so that we can care for families around the globe, all over. We're going to serve locally to have a global impact that are experiencing food insecurity as well. And then with our disaster relief, people ask when disaster happens, what are we doing as a church? This is what we do. We prepare in advance to be able to help those that are hit by something that's unexpected. I love that that's what we get to do. So the meals that we pack, maybe you've done that before with us with rice and lentils and a vitamin pack. Where does that go? It goes directly to our partners around the world. Very specifically and very recently, I had the opportunity to go to Panama with one of our teams to visit our local partner. We partner with the local church. They're an incredible church. They're so much fun. They have this ministry where they care for kids from all over the community. They come out, they hang out on the playground that a team from Harbor Point last year built, and they get to hear about Jesus and do games and have fun. And then at the very end, they get a packet of those meals to take home, helping nourish them and their families. And this church, it is an incredible church partner. I'm so excited. We're going to continue this partnership there in Panama, but they are caring for their own community well. God is moving powerfully through them, and we get to be a part of that. And while we were with them, they said, hey, why don't we go visit some of the families that are impacted by the meals that we distribute? And I said, yeah, I'd love that. So we go onto a property, and there was a grandmother that invites us, and she's so grateful for our visit, but her daughter comes out. And you can tell, like, maybe wasn't as comfortable with us being there and visiting. Maybe wasn't as comfortable with people that say they believe in God or Jesus, because she wasn't someone who believed. But as we're talking, we kind of hear what they're experiencing. We begin to pray. And we're praying. It felt like something supernatural happened. The wind changed. It was warm. There was a sweet smell in the air. While this prayer was happening, I'm like, oh my gosh, it feels like God is here right now. And as we're praying, this daughter who did not believe in Jesus begins to just bawl, like the Lord was meeting her in that moment. And we're done praying, and we're leaving, and she stops our liaison, the person that's helping translate, and says, bring the pastor over, bring the team over. I need to accept Jesus right now in this moment. And so we prayed with her. By the time we were done praying, let me tell you, her face had changed. There was something different about her spirit. She was smiling and laughing through her tears of just pure joy. God did something incredible because of something like the one meal package that gets delivered through our local partner that you'll help pack in June. God moves powerfully. I wanted you to know that story, because when you think of like packing a meal here locally and you don't know what happens in the world once it's sent out, it is changing lives. Now, you should also know that on top of our, kind of one event that's coming up in June, there are ongoing ministries and ways to step in every single week. We call our local and global ministry. And our local ministries, they are thriving and they are impactful, and you can be a part of it. Everyone has a next step. You can be a part of every Friday, packing backpacks and writing names on bags and delivering them to local elementary schools where we support hundreds of kids with a meal. And you could be a part of hosting kids. Just recently with our short-term family hosting, we've had couples and families that have gone through kind of the certification to welcome kids that are in crisis. Mom might be getting evicted, or dad might be going through something and is unable to care for their child. They go to our partner, Olive Crest, and say, is there anybody that can help? And these families, through our short-term family hosting, you could do this. We'll welcome this child into their home, and it could be for a weekend, it could be for weeks, and you get to determine how you jump in that way. But we would love to help you take your next step. Just recently, I met a family on our patio here at the church that had one of their children that they were hosting with them. And you could tell, I saw this little girl, maybe 7 years old, with her host family, and you could tell she just felt safe. That's what we get to offer. She was safe and she mattered. Then our global partners are in Mexico and Ukraine, Kenya, and now most recently Panama. And there are trips that you could be a part of. We'd go on our one-day trips to Mexico. We have these thriving relationships with the local church. That is our strategy. We want to find the local church and be a part of what they are doing. And it has been so much fun. And so we serve. Now, when we serve, the reality is you get to make that happen. You get to determine how far we serve and the impact we have by the way that you give. Your generosity matters, and it fuels Outreach's ministries. because your giving towards the general budget is incredible. But then you go above and beyond and give towards outreach, which is funded separately. So you might be asking, I want to be a part of these stories. I want to be a part of what God is doing. You can be. Text HP Outreach to 97,000. When you text, you'll get a link back that helps you set up your online giving. You can give a one-time gift or set up recurring giving to be a part of the ongoing work, the work that is week in, week out, so that others might know that they matter. That's the powerful thing that God has invited us to be a part of. So this week, and in the weeks in the future, would you pray? Would you step into serving? And would you give generously so that we might let the entire world know you matter to God, and then see what God does to transform the lives of people right here in our own community as well. I'd mentioned giving is done a little bit differently here. We fund outreach completely separate than our general budget, and I want you to know why. So check out this video.
Jesus says in Matthew 6, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will also be." Now this can be interpreted as this: where I direct my money indicates where my heart already is. And that's true. But there's also another way to think about it. Where your treasure is isn't just an indicator of where your heart has already landed. Because we can also read it like this: where I direct my treasure shapes my heart. It transforms me. Said differently, where the treasure is placed, the heart gets shaped. Now, God's heart for the hurting, particularly the under-resourced and the marginalized, is unmistakable in the Bible. And when we give towards the work of empowering and serving people who fall into those kinds of categories, we discover that not only is our own heart's condition revealed, our own heart also can't help but become more aligned with God's. Now, there are a lot of different ways for a church to fund its work among the under-resourced and the marginalized. Many churches, like us, want to respond with a heart of compassion to the needs of the overlooked, those who lack basic means. This is a ministry we call Outreach at Harbor Point. The standard model for financing these kinds of projects looks like this. Imagine this circle is representative of a church budget. So this includes all the stuff that happens within the church, like keeping the lights on, air conditioning, heating, staffing, maintaining buildings, buying parking cones, making coffee, and everything else that may go into the operational and ministry expenses of a church. This right here represents 10% of the total budget, which is what many churches direct toward outreach type initiatives. In effect, what's happening is this: a portion of the total giving is allocated for the marginalized and the under-resourced. While this is a great way to address it, and many churches have found success in it, we just don't do it this way. And here's why. Imagine for a moment there's a recession or a war or a conflict or inflation or even a global pandemic. Any number of those things can create economic distress and potentially cause budgets to contract. In that case, the support intended to be directed to the most vulnerable people who are always the most affected by an economic downturn, well, it also contracts. So to protect against that from happening, we fund the church's operating budget and our outreach budgets separately. And that way, no matter what happens to the overall budget, the ministry supporting those who struggle to find adequate means and the heart of our church are both protected. From day one at Harbor Point, we've invited our people to respond in generosity by going above and beyond their regular giving. Not instead of or as a portion of, but in addition to. In that way, the impact we have in the community through outreach is never in competition with the rest of the ministry work we've been called to carry out. Your generosity directly determines how much impact our outreach ministry has among our local and global neighbors who are in the greatest need. We've always said that generous people love being generous and that generosity begets more generosity. God has invited us, His people, to partner with Him to be difference makers in the world. Where your treasure is, there your heart will also be.